For a couple of months, there was actually a brief period of general stability and calm in the Middle East. In October of 2025, Israel and Hamas agreed to another ceasefire in and around Gaza that was brokered by America around the 2-year anniversary of the start of their war, which, by extension, also led to the Houthis in Yemen announcing a pause on their own attacks against Israel and international maritime shipping in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden theaters as well. The Houthis' announcement had also come on the heels of a separate Omani-brokered ceasefire that they had agreed with the United States back in May, that followed nearly 2 months of relentless American airstrikes against them, in which the Houthis had also agreed to stop their attacks against American and British-linked maritime shipping around them as well. So by October, it seemed that the Houthis had entered into ceasefires with both the Israelis and the Americans, while a separate 3.5-year-long ceasefire that had begun back in 2022 between all of the various factions within Yemen's own internal civil war was also still holding steady between the Houthis and the country's internationally recognized government, or IRG. No major fighting between Yemen's various internal factions had taken place in years, while the front lines had remained remarkably stable the entire time. And with the Houthis winding down their separate external fights against the Israelis and Americans, it appeared to a lot of people that Yemen was finally going to settle down again. Most of all to the United States, who's been eager to refocus its attention away from the Middle East to more pressing concerns like Venezuela and the Western Pacific. But unfortunately for everyone, the modern Middle East never remains peaceful or undramatic for very long. In the end, it took fewer than 2 months after the October Houthi-Israel ceasefire for the situation in Yemen to begin catastrophically unraveling again. On the 2nd of December, the Southern Transitional Council, or the STC, a separatist faction in Yemen that ultimately seeks the independence of the former state of South Yemen, but which had been working together with the internationally recognized government, or the IRG, suddenly broke ranks with the IRG and launched a surprise offensive against them into the Hadramaut Governorate, geographically the largest governorate or province within Yemen that takes up roughly 1/3 of the country's land, which had previously been split between STC control along the coast and IRG control across the interior. Codenamed by the STC as Operation Promising Future, the surprise offensive against the internationally recognized government rapidly developed into a decisive victory for them. Within only a week, they managed to completely overrun the entire Hadramaut Governorate, and then going even further, they overran the neighboring Al Mahra Governorate as well on the border with Oman, representing hundreds of thousands of square kilometers worth of captured territory. And even more importantly, by seizing control of all of these territories, the STC suddenly seized control over about 80% of Yemen's proven oil and gas reserves as well, which were seen as critical for achieving the STC's ultimate goal of secession and a functioning independent state. With their rapid military advances, the STC was able to capture virtually all of the territory that used to make up the former independent state of South Yemen, which was uniquely the Arab world's only communist state that historically used to exist between 1967 and 1990 before it unified with North Yemen. And with their capture of all of the oil and gas fields, the STC put themselves in the position to credibly declare their full secession and independence from Yemen as well. And what's even more incredible, the STC managed to accomplish all of this without any extensive fighting. STC troops effectively managed to just march through the two governorates with little resistance from local IRG-affiliated tribes and troops. The STC reported that just a mere 16 of their own fighters were killed during the week-long offensive, while the IRG reported that only 32 of their own personnel were killed. A stunning figure for how enormous the gains made by the STC are, and how categorically this shifted the balance of power within Yemen. The STC likely launched their surprise offensive into Hadramaut and Al Mahra when they did, for multiple reasons. There had been talk of the Saudis and the Houthis renewing their peace negotiations again after years and years of delays and following the Houthis' ceasefires with Israel and the United States. Still under unrelenting US financial sanctions, the Houthis were known to be demanding a large share of Yemen's oil wealth and a future negotiated settlement as a means of economic relief. And so, the STC's seizure of all of those oil fields in Hadramaut could have been a way to preempt those negotiations by securing the oil fields for themselves for their own long-term secession project. During a visit to Washington just 2 weeks before the offensive, Saudi Arabia's crown prince and de facto ruler, Mohammed bin Salman, is also known to have directly asked President Trump to intervene in the other conflict in Sudan, with expanded sanctions against the Rapid Support Forces, the UAE-backed militia in Sudan that the US accuses of committing genocide in Darfur, and which is fighting against the Saudi-backed side in that country's separate civil war. The UAE likely interpreted that Saudi request as a direct threat against their own interests in Sudan, which might have encouraged the UAE to give the STC in Yemen the green light for their offensive into Hadramaut to pull Saudi and American attention elsewhere off of Sudan. And more immediately, in late November, Saudi-backed tribal forces in the Hadramaut region began blocking oil production, which sparked energy shortages across the region and particularly in STC-controlled areas, which the STC themselves had to have interpreted as a direct threat to their long-term stability. By launching the surprise offensive, the STC and the UAE likely gambled on resolving all of these issues, and to secure the all-important oil fields to safeguard their long-term prospects at secession and independence. Yemen itself has been a proxy war of competing outside powers for more than a decade now. The UAE supports the STC in their bid for secession. Saudi Arabia supports the internationally recognized government and Yemen's territorial integrity, while Iran supports the Houthis and their separate vision for Yemen's territorial integrity. All three sides theoretically oppose each other in Yemen. But for several years, the UAE-backed STC and the Saudi-backed IRG had at least attempted to cooperate together against the Iran-backed Houthis, whom they mutually came to view as the bigger threat. Over the years, after the Saudis launched a devastating full-scale intervention in Yemen against the Houthis that began in 2015, the Houthis have fired hundreds of retaliatory missiles and drones at Saudi Arabia's cities all throughout the conflict, while they've also managed to strike the UAE from time to time as well, including a missile strike in Abu Dhabi in 2022 that killed 3 people. Both the UAE and Saudi Arabia want a pacified Yemen that's free of Iranian influence that no longer shoots back at them. But Yemen is also just further away from the UAE than it is from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia prefers a united and calm Yemen like it was prior to 2014, while the UAE sees Yemen as just a component in their greater overall strategy to build a ring of influence across the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa to connect to their other allies in the region like the RSF in Sudan, the El-Sisi regime in Egypt, Eritrea, and the breakaway state of Somaliland. The Saudis, meanwhile, have backed factions in Yemen's internationally recognized government like Islah, an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood whose ideology of political Islam horrifies the UAE, and why the UAE steadily came to back the more secular STC in their secession project in South Yemen instead. So, despite their shared animosity toward the Houthis in Yemen, the rival royal families in power in Saudi Arabia and the UAE also came to back different sides of the country with their own irreconcilable objectives. By 2022, the Saudis decided to remove the internationally recognized government's incompetent president and replaced him with an 8-man presidential leadership council to govern the country instead. The leader of the council was a Saudi-backed politician who favored national unity in Yemen, while his chief deputy was the head of the STC who wanted to partition Yemen between South and North instead. They were never going to work together for very long, but they also entered into a ceasefire with the Houthis the same year in 2022 that was initially only supposed to last for 6 months, but has continually held ever since, for now. Since December, when the front lines in Yemen suddenly shifted the most dramatically they had in years between the STC and the internationally recognized government, the immediate questions on everyone's minds were what would the STC do with their conquests, and how would the internationally recognized government and the Saudis end up responding? Taking the boldest option, the STC was conceivably capable of pursuing their ultimate objective of just unilaterally declaring their secession from Yemen and recreate the former state of South Yemen again, which they had already proposed calling South Arabia this time around instead. In theory, doing this without any outside foreign support would be a very dangerous and risky move. The world isn't kind to rebellious territories of UN-recognized countries unilaterally breaking away without the consent of their parent country. Other places that have done the same, like Somaliland, Abkhazia, and Kosovo, have faced decades of imposed isolation and non-recognition by large swaths of the international community. But the STC had plans to be different. Their leaders suggested that after they declared their independence, they would be willing to immediately accede to the Abraham Accords and recognize the State of Israel. Their hope was that this offer would have given them the negotiating leverage they needed over the Trump administration to extend US recognition towards their own independence, especially because there's already a major precedent for Trump overlooking international law and territorial integrity before in exchange for recognition of Israel. Back in 2020, during Trump's first term in office, he agreed to extend US recognition of Morocco's sovereignty over Western Sahara in exchange for Morocco's recognition of Israel, making the US the first country to ever formally recognize Morocco's occupation of the territory. Trump is well known to want to continue expanding the Abraham Accords in the Muslim world during his second term to score more diplomatic victories that he can sell at home. And so, the STC's assumption that he would probably be willing to extend American recognition of their independence in exchange for them becoming the next ones to join wasn't really that unrealistic. And by extension, joining the Abraham Accords would have easily secured Israel's recognition of their independence as well. The STC also likely believed that their ability to position themselves as a regional bulwark against the Houthis, and their control of nearly all of Yemen's oil and gas reserves, would help seal the deal with the Americans and Israelis as well. Joining the Abraham Accords and extending their recognition towards Israel would also further position the STC with their primary backer, the UAE, who themselves joined the Abraham Accords and recognized Israel in 2020 as well. Late in December of 2025, Israel also notably became the first UN-recognized country to extend their formal recognition towards Somaliland's independence, immediately across the Gulf of Aden from southern Yemen. Somaliland unilaterally declared their independence from Somalia more than 30 years ago, back in 1991, and though they've maintained their independence from the rest of Somalia in a de facto sense ever since, nobody ever took the formal step of actually recognizing it until Israel did just a few weeks ago. Somaliland is also closely aligned to the UAE. Since 2017, the Emiratis have invested $442 million in developing and operating the port of Berbera in Somaliland, transforming it into a strategic competitor with the nearby port of Djibouti for trade moving through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. Somaliland allowed the UAE to construct a military base at Berbera as well. And merely days after Israel's recognition of Somaliland, the UAE quietly announced that they would begin accepting Somaliland passports for travel, in essence, recognizing Somaliland's sovereignty in everything but name. If the STC was actually successful at declaring their secession from Yemen, then the UAE could have conceivably followed Israel by recognizing both South Yemen's and Somaliland's independence as well. Doing so would have established closely UAE-aligned states on either side of the south entrance to the Red Sea, with the closely UAE-aligned Rapid Support Forces nearby in Sudan, which might still ultimately win the civil war there, and grant the UAE another closely aligned state along the central Red Sea coastline, along with el-Sisi's Egypt and Israel further to the north that are both already closely aligned with the UAE as well. To the UAE, all of these pieces on the board, from South Yemen to Somaliland to the RSF in Sudan to el-Sisi's Egypt and Israel, are all part of a vast long-term plan to dominate the Red Sea and its lucrative trade volume in order to secure a wealthy future after the end of oil. A future that Saudi Arabia is also concerned about, that is pushing both countries to increasingly compete against each other for alternative industries like tourism and AI technology. But to Saudi Arabia, the UAE's Red Sea strategy cannot appear as anything else other than an Emirati attempt to encircle them. For years, the Saudis have been attempting to do everything they can to make the Houthis accept a power-sharing deal in a unified Yemen that would restrict their role in the government. Part of how they plan to do that was by offering the Houthis a share in the unified country's oil and gas resources that mostly exist in the south. So, with the prospect of the South seceding and taking basically all of the oil and gas with them, the Saudis were facing their worst-case scenario in Yemen. Without the oil and gas reserves, the internationally recognized government that they support would almost certainly be too weak to impose any kind of a deal on sharing power with the Houthis in the north. And realistically, the Houthis would probably just eliminate them and politically dominate the remaining North Yemen rump state. Saudi Arabia would become trapped with a radical Iranian-backed Houthi Shiite theocracy directly on their southern border that would be left chronically impoverished without any access to southern Yemen's oil and gas reserves, which is about as big of a nightmare scenario for the Saudis as imaginable. Shortly after their offensive, the STC announced that they intended to hold a referendum on independence from the rest of Yemen within the next 2 years by 2028. while the Saudis were consistently and strongly reiterating that all of this was completely unacceptable to them. Within days of the STC territorial takeovers, tens of thousands of Saudi-backed troops loyal to the internationally recognized government began mobilizing on the new front lines while threatening a major counteroffensive. Saudi Arabia demanded that the STC withdraw from all of the territories in Yemen they seized and gave them a week-long ultimatum to do so, or else. The STC consistently refused to withdraw, the week-long Saudi ultimatum passed by, and the or else phase began happening. At the end of December, the Saudi Air Force launched airstrikes on the STC-controlled port city of Mukalla, bombing what it alleged were weapons shipments arriving to the STC from the UAE, which the UAE denied. The very next day, the internationally recognized government demanded that all UAE troops needed to leave Yemeni territory within 24 hours and declared a state of emergency. And then, on the 2nd of January of 2026, the internationally recognized government declared that it was launching a so-called peaceful operation to regain control of the key military sites that the STC had seized in the Hadramaut province. Within minutes of the announcement, however, the Saudi Air Force already began launching airstrikes across southern Yemen against STC military targets with confirmed casualties, while a military spokesperson for the STC said afterward that they were now in a decisive and existential war against the Saudi-backed forces in Yemen. Over the 3rd and 4th of January, troops loyal to the internationally recognized government with Saudi aerial support managed to rapidly and successfully counterattack across all of the Hadramaut and Al-Makra provinces, not only reversing all of the territorial gains that had been made by the STC, but also overrunning the coast of the Hadramaut province and capturing the strategic port city of Mukalla that the STC had controlled for years before they launched their offensive. On the 4th of January, after these decisive takeovers, the internationally recognized government's information minister reported to the New York Times that their next objective could be the STC's capital city of Aden, and demanded that the STC's forces in the area immediately surrender as the government reasserts its authority. By the 9th of January, it had become obvious that the STC was essentially a paper tiger, and their offensive to seize control over the eastern oil fields had all been a colossal miscalculation. With Saudi-backed troops breaking into the STC's capital of Aden, the STC's leader reportedly fled the country for exile in the UAE, and hours later, the STC's remaining leadership, under immense Saudi pressure, announced that it was completely dissolving altogether, with the Saudi-backed government troops overrunning all of the rest of the former STC-held territory. All within the span of just a single month, the STC blitzed across Yemen in a nearly bloodless campaign, and it seemed like it was inevitable that they were going to secede and recreate South Yemen again. And then, they just immediately collapsed and fell apart about as quickly, under the weight of this massive Saudi-backed counteroffensive. Hundreds of fighters on both sides have reportedly been killed since the internationally recognized government's counteroffensive began, while all of this has been greatly exacerbating the rising tensions between the UAE and Saudi Arabia, which will constrain both of their abilities to actually contain their mutual foe in Yemen, whom they had previously been cooperating against, the Houthis, who are now being presented with a golden opportunity immediately after they reach their ceasefires with Israel and the United States to refocus their attention back inward to expand their own control in Yemen during the chaos. The Houthis have in fact never before been in a better geopolitical position than they are currently. After 2 years of war with Israel, all of Iran's other proxies in the Middle East have been either crippled or outright destroyed. Hamas is in tatters in the ruins of Gaza. Most of Hezbollah's leadership has been killed and its fighting capacity severely degraded, while the Assad regime in Syria has been completely demolished and removed from the board altogether. The Houthis are the lone Iranian proxy in the region that not only remains intact, but if anything, is stronger than ever before. Their fight against Israel in solidarity with Gaza and their constant war footing has proven to be highly popular within Yemen and very effective at recruitment. In 2022, on the eve of the war with Israel, the Houthis had an estimated 220,000 fighters within their ranks. And by 2024, just a couple of years later, they had managed to grow that number dramatically to around 350,000 fighters, which is one of the largest armies controlled by any power in the world, nearly the same size as the standing army of Turkey, and their numbers have probably only grown since then. While the STC and the internationally recognized government have controlled most of Yemen's geographic land and oil reserves, the Houthis have maintained their control over the most densely populated parts of the country, including the capital city, Sana'a. Roughly 3/4 of Yemen's population live within Houthi-controlled territories, giving them dramatically more manpower to work with than their internal rivals in the internationally recognized government and STC have to work with. Their external struggle against Israel in the West have been immensely popular within Yemen itself, while their military capabilities have been increasing dramatically since the war began as well. At the start of the war with Israel, the Houthis were not generally capable of striking Israeli territory directly. But by May of 2025, Houthi ballistic missiles were capable of accurately hitting the country's primary airport at Ben Gurion near Tel Aviv. And in September of 2025, a Houthi drone was even capable of breaking through Israel's vaunted air defenses and impacted Ramon Airport near Israel's southern city of Eilat, injuring 22 people in the process. Long supported and armed by the Iranians with ballistic missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, drones, intelligence, and training, the Houthis have also greatly expanded their sources of arms and intelligence to other anti-Western forces from around the world since the Gaza war began as well. Several of the missiles fired by the Houthis at Israel over the past 2+ years have been found to have Korean Hangul script written on their components, suggesting that the North Koreans have been supplying them with missiles and other weapons. Russian-made P-800 Onik anti-ship missiles have been reported to be in the Houthis' arsenal now as well, while the Wall Street Journal has even alleged that the Russian GRU is actively present in Houthi-controlled territory in Yemen, and were providing them with the geospatial intelligence they require to target Western ships in the Red Sea, while Russian oil has been being supplied to the Houthis through their controlled port at Hodeidah. China has also been allegedly supplying the Houthis with copious amounts of dual-use components that they've been utilizing for military purposes, while they're also known to have established joint smuggling operations, training, and weapons procurement with the al-Shabaab militant group in Somalia as well. The Houthis are a very different organization than they were even just a few years ago. And after 2 years worth of defiant military experience fighting against the most powerful militaries in the world, the Americans and the Israelis, they are far more formidable than they've ever been before, too. With the rest of Iran's axis of resistance left in tatters, the Houthis now like to claim that they are the vanguard that now leads the Arab world in the resistance against the American and Israeli regional order in the Middle East. They routinely label other major Arab powers like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt all as American puppets who have long ago betrayed the Palestinian cause, which by extension also includes their proxy-backed governments in Yemen like the internationally recognized government and the STC, whom the Houthis have been able to effectively label as the puppets of the puppets. The STC's apparent strategy of trying to declare their independence and then recognizing Israel in return for US recognition of their independence might have made great external sense beyond Yemen, but it was also a move that was incredibly risky within Yemen, because Israel is wildly unpopular domestically with the Yemeni people, especially within the Houthi-controlled territory. The Houthis make their ultimate ambitions no secret. They want to unify Yemen's internationally recognized borders under their own control and crush their internal rivals, acquire all of their resources, and then use them for further rounds of fighting with Iran's backing against America and Israel, and their allies, the Saudis and the Emiratis, in order to push Western influence out of the region for good. These goals, of course, have led the Houthis into direct conflict with virtually everyone around them before. And while they've taken some pretty heavy blows, they've never been able to be fully defeated from the outside. After attacking nearly 200 ships in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden after Israel launched its invasion of Gaza, including the hijacking of one ship and the sinking of 2 others, the Trump administration in the US initiated Operation Rough Rider in early 2025, a series of massive air and naval strikes against Houthi radar systems, air defenses, and missile and drone storage and launch sites that they were using to carry out their attacks with. About a month into the operation, the British Royal Air Force joined the Americans in the aerial campaign as well. Over 52 days, the US carried out approximately 339 airstrikes and hit more than 1,000 targets in Houthi-controlled territory, dropping more than $1 billion worth of ordnance in the process, while the British carried out around another 80 additional airstrikes of their own as well. And on top of the military attacks, the US began reapplying substantial economic pressure on the Houthis as well by redesignating them as a foreign terrorist organization near the beginning of 2025, suffocating their access to the global banking system and hampering their ability to pay their fighters and public service employees. The US, UK, and the Houthis eventually entered into a ceasefire in May of 2025, but the fight between the Houthis and the Israelis continued on for many more months afterward. And the Israeli airstrikes and attacks on the Houthis were probably more devastating than the American and British ones were. Israeli warplanes virtually destroyed most of the primary port that the Houthis control at Hodeidah. They were able to kill the Houthis' appointed prime minister with another strike in August of 2025, and in October, just before they agreed to their renewed ceasefire, they managed to successfully assassinate the Houthis' chief of staff as well. Nonetheless, none of these actions have substantially degraded the Houthis' capability to wage war. Unlike Hamas and Hezbollah, all of their primary leadership and command structures continue to remain alive and intact. With the US and Israeli ceasefires in place, the Houthis have been freed up from 2 years of external war to shift their focus back towards the internal civil war within Yemen again, just at about the same time as their rivals begin a fight amongst themselves, while the renewed US sanctions placed on them have effectively removed Washington's ability to credibly threaten them with anything any further. As has been proven by the last 2 years of the Americans and Israelis attempting to bomb the Houthis into submission, and the many years of the Saudis and Emiratis trying to bomb them into submission before that, aerial strikes against the Houthis alone will never be enough to stop them or to contain their ambitions. The only thing that might be able to stop them, a ground invasion and an occupation, is completely unpalatable for anyone to consider. The territory the Houthis control in northern Yemen is extremely mountainous and rugged like Afghanistan, while the large population of some 24 million people there are deeply anti-Western and would be all but guaranteed to put up a fanatical resistance to such an operation. A ground invasion to topple the Houthis from power would probably require hundreds of thousands of troops in order to be successful. Neither Washington nor Tel Aviv have any appetite or bandwidth to conduct the massive and costly operation here it would take to truly remove the Houthis from the board, and the Houthis know it. While they also know that if the internationally recognized government and the STC begin fighting amongst themselves in Yemen, they are the ones who likely stand the most to gain from it. It is conceivable that the Houthis could press their advantage and push into the rest of the Marib province that they currently split almost 50-50 with the internationally recognized government, which, notably, has most of the rest of the other 20% of Yemen's oil and gas fields that the Houthis would feel more incentivized to seize if they know they're going to lose out on the bigger oil fields in the Hadramaut province. At the same time, or alternatively, they could also choose to advance south along the Red Sea coastline into the Taiz province, where they currently contest the regional capital with the internationally recognized government. The coastline in the province around the city of Mocha is currently controlled by forces that were aligned with the STC. But both STC and internationally recognized government forces have reportedly moved away from this theater to support the new campaign in the east, which might expose this area to renewed attacks from the Houthis. And to give you a sense of just how far down the list of priorities that Yemen has fallen on the Trump administration's agenda, there is currently not a US envoy assigned to the country at all, while there is one assigned to Greenland for some reason, showing that the Trump administration is more focused on Greenland than it is on everything that's about to go down in Yemen, in the heart of one of the most critical trade arteries on the planet. Without the US refocusing at least some attention to Yemen, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who are both ostensibly US allies, will seemingly continue on along their collision course that will enable the Houthis and their Iranian backers to take advantage of the vacuum. While the STC itself has now been dissolved and all of its former territories been overrun by the Saudi-backed forces in the country, that doesn't mean that the cause for South Yemen's independence has been completely lost. The STC's leader is still alive and well in exile in the UAE, while the cause for separatism in the south of the country also didn't come from nowhere. It's already been reported that thousands of people have taken to the streets in Aden and other southern cities to protest in support of the separatist cause against the Saudi-backed government. While Saudi air power can likely continue suppressing any major attempt by the STC to regain their power, the Saudi-backed forces on the ground that now occupy the south cities like Aden, which were under de facto separatist control for nearly a decade before now, will probably have their work cut out for them and might even face a long-term insurgency that could prove difficult to ultimately contain. But only time will tell. Hanging in the balance, the UAE stands to lose their keystone secession project in South Yemen that they need in order to connect to their other backed projects in Somalia and Sudan for control of the Red Sea. And with the Houthis still powerful and waiting in place to see what ends up happening, and a potential insurgency across the south from the now occupied separatists, the Saudis still stand at a risk of witnessing the eventual partition of Yemen that could leave behind either one or two hostile states toward it directly on their southern border, that'll foment instability for decades to come. The stage has been set for the next phase of the long and complicated civil war in Yemen. Now, Yemen and the broader Middle East is also known for a lot of things besides this current conflict, and the region's food culture has absolutely gotta be one of those top things. From chicken shawarma pita bars and Persian spiced cauliflower quinoa bowls to shawarma meatballs and more, and luckily for you, you can get everything you need to cook delicious, home-cooked meals just like them delivered right to your doorstep through this video's sponsor, HelloFresh. The concept of HelloFresh is pretty straightforward. You just visit their app or website and select which meals you want to eat, and then the next week, an insulated box will show up on your doorstep filled with all of the fresh, pre-portioned, and partially prepared ingredients you need so that you can home cook your meals way faster than if you had wasted a bunch of time planning your meals out, going to the grocery store and picking out ingredients and then coming home and prepping. You can also choose from a variety of menu options to suit all of your needs and tastes. From fit and wholesome to quick and easy, vegetarian to family friendly, there's something for everyone to enjoy. And HelloFresh knows that your plans might change and life can get unexpectedly busy. That's why they let you easily customize your delivery from week to week as well, allowing you to tailor everything to your own schedule by adjusting your delivery date or skipping a week when you're not able to cook at home. And best of all, the meals themselves just taste really, really good too. That's the biggest reason of all that I've been a loyal customer myself to HelloFresh for years now, and why I've been making meals like this amazing buffalo spiced chicken for more than 4 years now. They're just the best solution that I've ever found for having regular home-cooked dinners. And if you want to see if I'm right and improve the way you eat too, now's a great time to do so because you'll get a free Zwilling 4-star chef's knife on your 3rd box, plus 10 free meals and your first box shipping free with the code RealLifeLore HFZWL after scanning the QR code, clicking the button here on screen, or by following the link that's down below in the description. Make sure to use my code to get this deal before supplies run out. And as always, thank you so much for watching.